David Cameron has said more than once that society is stronger when we make vows to each other and support each other, which is why he supports, one of the reasons why he supports gay marriage. And the government's about to begin a period of consultation, leading, he hopes, to a change in the law which would make it legal. But the opposition is rallying, and now one of Britain's most senior Catholics, Cardinal Keith O'Brien, has said the idea is grotesque and would shame the country. He's on the line from Edinburgh. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
People may say you, as a church leader, are perfectly entitled to have your views about gay marriage, but this sort of language is simply inflammatory.
I don't think it's inflammatory at all. I think I'm simply handing on the teaching of the Christian church for almost 2,000 years, for over 2,000 years since Christ was on earth, handing on his same teaching and doing my best to hand it on in a way that many people can hear it.
Grotesque?
Yes.
Shaming the country?
Indeed.
How shaming the country?
I think if the United Kingdom does go for and supports same-sex marriages, it is indeed shaming our country. We're taking standards which are not just our own, but standards from the Declaration on Human Rights of the United Nations, where marriage is defined as a relationship between men and women, and turning that on its head and saying that marriage is no longer marriage. We're trying to redefine something which has been known and revered for centuries and making it something different. But
when you use language like shaming the country, it rather sounds as if you want to turn the clock right back and maybe we should lock up people who have gay relationships.
Certainly not. We already have same-sex unions recognised, and I acknowledge them, and if they help people who are of the same sex living together in various ways, well, obviously I don't agree with that, but I accept that as the law of the land. But I do not accept the fact that one can redefine the term marriage to mean something which it has never meant before.
Well, let me read you part of what you wrote in the Sunday Telegraph yesterday. Imagine for a moment the government had decided to legalise slavery, but assured us that no one would be forced to keep a slave. Would such worthless assurances calm our fury? The idea of introducing the notion of something as grotesque as slavery, and I use the word there advisory, the ultimate denial of a person's human rights in this context, will itself prompt many people to think that this is grotesque. Your notion of it is grotesque.
I'm not saying that it's grotesque. Perhaps to some people it might appear grotesque. But
you're a cardinal. Should you be using that kind of language, equating in even as remotely as this the notion of gay relationships with slavery?
I think it's a very, very good example as to what might happen in our own country at this present time. And I feel I've a duty, I've a responsibility to preach and to teach. And this is one of the ways in which I do it.
Sorry, you lost me a little here. What might happen? I mean, legalising slavery and the equivalent of homosexual marriage?
It is a perfectly good example as to what could happen in our own country if we go this way. And as I say, I'm simply handing on the teaching of the Christian church down through the years.
So those countries where it is already legal, or those states where it is already legal, you would say that they are in some way grotesque and they are violating human rights? I
would say that those countries where this is legal are indeed violating human rights. We know that. We know what the United Nations Declaration states, and we know what follows on from something like this. It seems to me to be the thin edge of the wedge, and it's changing the whole notion of what marriage and what a family is.
So countries...
And obviously, too, I think it affects children who are born. Children have the right to have a mother and a father.
There are a vast number of relationships in this country where children have only one parent, as you know, single-parent families.
Oh, yes, of course, we acknowledge that. There's nothing wrong in that at all. That's just something which does happen.
But that is better than a child having two loving parents who love the child.
We're trying to legalise the same-sex unions and simply call it marriage, and it's not marriage. No matter what we say about it, it is not marriage.
So countries like Argentina, Belgium, Canada, Iceland, Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, South Africa, Spain, Sweden, I could go on, those countries are shaming themselves.
In certain ways, they are shaming themselves in calling same-sex unions marriages. They're not marriages, and you can't redefine the word.
The Church doesn't own marriage, does it?
The Church doesn't own marriage. It's a natural state, and we know natural law teaching of what marriage is as well. In the natural law, it is quite simply natural for a man and a woman to be together for the procreation and education of children and for their own mutual love.
Aren't you afraid that you're going to cement in the minds of many people the idea that the Church is way behind society? Society is moving ahead, the Church is holding back. Most people now, many people anyway, refer to civil partnerships as marriages anyway.
I think that it's time now to call a halt for what you might call progress in society. I don't call progress the things that are happening nowadays. And when we talk about the thin edge of the wedge, we remember that Abortion Act in 1967 when we were told, there would be clearly defined ways in when abortions might take place. And now we know there's been about 7 million abortions since that happened. And further aberrations are hinted at this present time.
And
the same we would see would happen if same-sex unions were defined as marriages. Further aberrations would be taking place and society would be degenerating even further than it has already degenerated into immorality.
Cardinal O'Brien, thank you very much.